For joining today's presentation, Hojas, 1,000 Layers, Leadership and Power Building for Park Equity. My name is Anna Rubio, and I am a research assistant with Central Valley Health Policy Institute. And today I am accompanied with two of my colleagues who will also be introducing themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Atsiri Barbosa. I'm also a research assistant at CVHPI, and I'm excited to be here today.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today. My name is Armando Ramirez, and I'm a research assistant at the Central Valley Health Policy Institute.
Thank you both. Today's presentation will focus on the leadership of Fresno BHC and the advocacy efforts to improve park disparities in Fresno through the development of people power and power building. We will also focus on how two of the emerging leaders, Kimberly McCoy and Antonio Jauregui, played a key role in uniting the community and garnering support for park and green space funds, as well as how their participation was instrumental in the success of the Parks for All campaign and Measure P. I would like to start today's presentation with a little bit of background information about building healthy communities. Next, please. Fresno Building Healthy Communities began in 2010 as one of the 14 sites in California, funded by the California Endowment. Fresno BHC focuses on addressing health equity issues in Central, Southeast, and Southwest Fresno neighborhoods, an area that became known as the Fresno BHC Place. Fresno BHC began to formulate campaigns to address the issues that their community conversations brought forward. Two important concepts that emerged from this work were people power and power building. Next, please. People power and power building are two key terms that have emerged since working with the community and have become essential when addressing health inequities. People power refers to building communities where historically excluded adults and youth residents have voice, agency, and power in public and private decision-making to create an inclusive democracy and close health equity gaps. Power building, on the other hand, is an investment in an emerging ecosystem of organizations with diverse capacities, skills, and expertise. These are then mobilized as resources to prioritize health equity in decision-making spaces. Next, please. When asked what Fresno BHC could address regarding improvements in the city, during interviews, the youth prioritized parks. The condition and existence of parks vary greatly for Fresno residents, depending on where they live. In 2016, North Fresno neighborhoods, such as those within the 93720 zip code, had park space of more than 4.5 acres per 1,000 residents. In contrast, Southwest Fresno neighborhoods in the 93706 zip code had only 1 acre of park space per 1,000 residents. Historically disadvantaged and underrepresented Central and South Fresno residents include those who live in areas of Southwest Fresno that were formerly redlined, contributing to the systemic disinvestment in their neighborhoods, and consequently, parks. After researching and analyzing how the city would allocate funds for the parks, Fresno BHC realized that the Fresno Parks Master Plan, which is the foundation for park investment and other improvements to the city, hadn't been updated since 1989. This resulted in decades of disinvestment, such as a lack of staff and a severe decline in maintenance, with about $112 million in deferred park maintenance, or $3.3 million each year on average. Next, please. The conversations between Fresno BHC and residents and youth identified a lack of parks and green spaces in their neighborhoods, as well as a lack of amenities in existing parks. As a result, the Fresno BHC Coalition has worked to empower neighborhoods, leverage existing funds, and increase the involvement of the community residents. These community discussions were essential to laying the foundation of the Parks for All campaign, which eventually led to Fresno BHC to implement Measure P, a tax measure to fund parks in Fresno. Something that Fresno BHC wanted the community to be more involved in was the Fresno 2035 General Plan, which supports the community's vision to preserve the desirable qualities that make the city of Fresno an ideal place to live, work, and play. Next, please. Community leaders were essential in drawing attention and garnering support for parks. Two key participants who emerged as leaders during the Parks for All and Measure P campaigns are Kimberly McCoy and Antonio Jauregui. McCoy's involvement began with volunteer work as a local canvasser. She then went on to be the project director for Fresno BHC and the chair of the Parks, Recreation, and Arts Commission in Fresno. McCoy's personal experiences have motivated her to become an advocate and a decision maker for Fresno's parks and ensure residents have a safe and healthy place to spend time. During our interview with Jauregui, he explained his involvement as a community advocate began during his time as a youth leader with Boys and Men of Color. Jauregui stated that he took the opportunity to be a youth advocate because he was experiencing the lacking conditions of the parks in his own neighborhood. Although his involvement with parks came naturally, he took it upon himself to gather data by talking to residents and sharing it through presentations in order to garner support for park funding. Next, please. I would like to bring attention to something that McCoy mentioned during the interview when talking about the importance of community input. She said, "We went on this learning experience together, or this journey together. Being able to connect residents to their power and letting them know it's okay to voice which you would like to see and what you don't want to see in your community."
As Anna mentioned earlier, Jauregui, Fresno BHC youth leader, experienced the effects of park disinvestment firsthand. He shared that to get in and out of his neighborhood, he needed to pass Hyde Park, which is located in Southwest Fresno. He saw the conditions of this park daily, which included trash, broken bottles, and a lack of infrastructure, such as equipment and bathrooms. Despite these conditions, he noticed that families still use the park regularly. Through his data collection, he learned that some of the basic amenities like trash cans, benches, and portable restrooms that were found at the parks were actually provided through resident cooperation. It was situations like this that led him to become an advocate for parks. When we spoke with Jauregui, he shared that healthy parks mean healthy residents, which result in a healthy community and one healthy Fresno. Jauregui also compared park advocacy work to Mil Hojas, a Mexican pastry made up of many layers. He explained that park advocacy required meetings and trainings, which at the time might have seemed like they were not contributing to much change. However, these were all key components to laying the groundwork for change. Next. Having talked about people power and the two emerging health equity leaders, now I would like to focus on growing leadership, specifically on the Parks for All campaign and Measure P. First, let's talk about the Parks for All campaign. This campaign resulted from a joint effort from Fresno BHC Coalition partners, and it aimed to do the following three things. One, change the narrative on parks in Fresno. Two, secure the necessary investments to improve existing parks in South Fresno. And three, build parks where they were absent from neighborhoods. It is important to highlight that the Parks for All campaign wouldn't have been possible without the coalition partner organizations. They play an essential role in building resident power and providing the foundation for policy and systems change. For example, as a volunteer canvasser with Communities for a New California Education Fund, which is a coalition partner, McCoy gained the skills, knowledge, and confidence to work with the community and other stakeholders that she still uses to this day. Next. Let's continue our conversation on growing leadership, focusing on Measure P. Measure P refers to the Fresno Clean and Safe Neighborhood Parks, Transactions and Use Tax, which would provide a funding base for Fresno parks, recreation, and arts. Measure P proposed to add a 3/8 or 0.375 cent sales tax for purchases made in the city of Fresno for the next 30 years. Measure P funds will be used for programs to engage children and at-risk youth, as well as repairs, improve safety, lighting, and hiring park rangers. With that said, let me tell you about the impressive leadership work that leaders and resident advocates did to make Measure P a reality. In just 2 months, resident advocates collected 12,000 signatures to put this tax measure on the 2018 ballot. That is very impressive, considering that a total of 30,000 signatures were needed. On top of that, leaders working on parks also gathered the momentum and allies needed to move the work forward across Fresno. The Measure P Coalition was formed, which consisted of more than 30 nonprofit or community-based organizations and residents. Also, Fresno BHC ensured that communities that were historically ignored and left out of the decision-making power process had a seat at the table. Additionally, an oversight commission was written into Measure P to serve as a guide to give recommendations to the Fresno City Council and ensure that the highest need neighborhoods are prioritized for Measure P projects. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Unfortunately, Measure P faced strong opposition. Much of the criticism came from local officials and stakeholders. Such criticism was often centered on potential new tax revenues being allocated to parks instead of city service providers, such as fire and police departments. However, Measure P advocates cited city budget allocation of more than 50% of its general funds going towards the fire and police departments in 2018. Additionally, two different but related criticisms were that adding new parks would potentially increase crime and that police needed more funding to protect the existing parks and community. The opposition to Measure P filed these arguments and more with the city in their case against the measure. Next. There was also other opposition to Measure P. Some residents dismissed canvassers and voiced concerns about adding new taxes. Various North Fresno residents also had a different perspective about the state of parks throughout Fresno and questioned the need for Measure P. One argument that emerged was about the equitable distribution of Measure P funds, with calls for the funding to be allocated equally across Fresno, meaning that they wanted funds to be evenly distributed across neighborhoods, regardless of their circumstances, needs, or disadvantages. On top of that, many residents outside of North Fresno did not see the impacts of park disparities in their own neighborhoods, which throughout conversations made clear that equal instead of equitable distribution will perpetuate disparities in park space and amenities between North and South Fresno. Along with the anti-Measure P narratives, canvassers heard McCoy share with us that yes on P signs across the city were torn down and replaced with no on P signs, and that Measure P misinformation was being shared with residents.
So many people came together to make sure that Measure P funds secured enough signatures to appear on the 2018 ballot. McCoy shared with us that the language on the ballot was incorrect. Once all the votes were counted, Measure P had passed with a simple majority vote. A simple majority vote requires more than half the votes, typically 50% plus one. And in this case, it passed with 52% of the votes. However, it was challenged by city officials who believed that a tax measure, such as Measure P, would need a supermajority, or 2/3 or 66.7% of the votes to pass. And because of this, Measure P was not declared a win. But instead of admitting defeat, Fresno BHC went back to the youth to ask what they wanted. Do they want to continue fighting to have the tax measure implemented as a citizens' initiative? The youth were in agreement to keep fighting, and Fresno BHC challenged the decision in court. Fresno BHC fought the ruling that only a simple majority was needed to endorse Measure P by taking this up to the California Supreme Court. Measure P then became implemented as a citizen-led initiative after the City Council voted 5-2 to accept the ruling. Now that the measure had passed, an important aspect built into the Measure P initiative was the creation of the oversight body, the Parks, Recreation, and Arts Oversight Commission, which is to help navigate where park funding would be allocated. One of the commission's first tasks was to determine the 50% of the highest needs neighborhoods for park investment. The top 50% of highest needs neighborhoods were then narrowed down to the top 33% by the City Council. And something important to mention is that most of the census tracts defined as highest needs were located in the southern part of Fresno. And the commission's next job was to continue to provide feedback on the city's handling of funds for Measure P. In the early stages, McCoy was a general member of the Recreation, Arts, and Parks Commission. However, when elected chair, Commissioner Joe Barraza stepped down, he nominated McCoy for the chair position. McCoy called it a full circle moment, explaining that while the nomination caught her off guard, she was happy to see the results of her hard work, from volunteer canvasser to project director, and the long hours she spent gathering signatures and training others to do the same. And then here's just a quick tax breakdown of where the money would be going under the new tax measure. So 46% will be used to repair existing parks, 21.5% will be invested in new parks, 12% will provide grants for nonprofits, 11.3% will be used to create new trails, and 8.5% will be used for youth and senior programs. And 0.75% of the funding is unspecified. All of this would not have been possible without the community and Fresno BHC. Fresno BHC's power building efforts help the community unite their voices and empower residents to fight for community and neighborhood investments. Together, advocates, youth, and resident leaders navigated the political system and fought at the ballot box and in court to ensure funds were secured for Fresno neighborhoods that had been denied quality park space for decades. City leaders who had previously opposed the Measure P came to be in full support of it after the California Supreme Court ruling, acknowledging the measure's potential benefits for the city and community. And McCoy made it clear that Measure P had always been good because it provided a vital source of park funding that the city needed. Measure P has been something that the city has needed for so long, so why did it take it now for you to accept Measure P's win? Ensuring that residents feel welcome when visiting their local parks and recreational areas is the center of her work. For her, inclusive and accessible park and wilderness amenities are key, along with instilling a community understanding that a person's health is directly connected to parks, green, and wilderness spaces. The people power and leadership capacity that the Fresno BHC Coalition helped to grow and support continues during Measure P implementation. As funds are generated by Measure P and put into actionable plans for the highest needs neighborhoods in Fresno, residents continue advocating for their communities and overseeing implementation. While the plan discussions are not without challenges, advocates and the community leaders continue to push for the city for Measure P budget and planning transparency. The Fresno BHC Coalition has continued its focus on increasing community voice and engagement in other tax measure initiatives, including advocating for increased community participation and fund allocation for Measure C. And lastly, to end this presentation, I think this quote really encapsulates the importance of the community coming together to change the outlook of Fresno forever. Once in a lifetime, we can make a difference in our community. We can put Fresno on the map by supporting the parks and arts measure with our signatures, our time, and our support. Act locally to forever change the culture of the place we call home. Mas Masamoto. Thank you everyone for attending this presentation. This was on the case study called Mil Hojas, 1,000 Layers, Leadership and Power Building for Merced for Park Equity. We want to thank the residents and advocates for their work, and we'd like to thank the funders who made this work possible. Thank you again.